think we're sort of on the same page with that. But that's really the outcome that we're going for here. Okay. So I'm going to turn it back to Carol, who's going to help facilitate us today. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So quick run through of our, thank you, Erin. We can advance group norms, the norms of collaboration. We're promoting a spirit of inquiry. We're pausing, paraphrasing, and probing for specificity. We are putting ideas on the table, and we are paying attention to ourselves and others. And we are always starting from a place of presuming positive intentions. In terms of our technical process, we invite you, as always, to use chat to ask questions and share responses. If you choose to speak, please use your raise hand feature. We're going to start and end on time, and we invite you to silence electronics and disengage from them throughout our presentation. So thanks very much. Erin, next slide. I'll turn the floor over to you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I myself, Roberta, and other teammates here are going to review the recommendations and the overall perspective of each of 255 and 386. We did not have time to have two separate meetings, but we realize that many of you are on both committees and the work is very linked. So we're going to go through both reports. If you recall, 255 asked us to establish an advisory committee, which is you. And then we had to provide a plan for the provision of early intervention services through a quasi-independent government agency structure. We had to analyze and recommend an extended Part C option for 3-year-olds and then recommend services for 3-year-olds. So the first thing that we did was establish the advisory committee. We had a nomination process launched at the conclusion of this session, and we ensured all advisory committee member roles were filled in a timely fashion. And then we contracted with the independent facilitator to ensure meaningful support for the advisory committee, and we provided an opportunity for members of the public to attend each of the advisory committee meetings. We also posted all of these materials and recordings of each meeting on the CDS webpage. Section 2, the department was asked to develop a plan for early intervention services, including the establishment and appointment of an independent board for the quasi-state agency, quasi-independent government agency rather, current or proposed memorandum of understanding between DOE and CDS, how the plan addressed the 16 minimum required components of the Part C program, and a detailed timeline for implementation, including any necessary statutory and regulatory changes. So the advisory committee met on January 25th of this year to review the department's idea for the governing board of the state IEU. The AAG, Sarah Forrester, who's on this call, and the department gave a presentation about what was required in order to establish an independently governed state IEU, which we're going to call SIEU from now on, and breaks were taken throughout the presentation for committee input. Prior to this meeting, the committee members received a copy of the PowerPoint that we were going to be using, as well as samples of statutes creating other education agencies with governing boards for reference. And then the advisory committee provided the roles and responsibilities that would be needed to be placed in the board for the board that the Department of Education and the state IEU. And all of those were included in the timeline for LD 255 following the meeting that was provided to all of you. In preparation for the February 15th advisory committee meeting, the current MOU between CDS and DOE was provided to the advisory committee members on Friday, January 28th. And then advisory committee members discussed the current MOU and provided feedback to the main DOE on February 15th. That should be 2022 because it wasn't last year in January. So the 16 minimum required components of the Part C program. Part C of the IDEA includes 16 required components for a statewide system. The Department of Education is required to report on these components annually as part of an approval process for Maine's Part C grant. Maine is fully meeting the 16 required components of Maine's Part C program and will continue to do so under a refined system. In developing the plan, the department carefully considered the appropriate entity or entities to assume responsibility for each of the 16 components. The details of the compliance is contained in the full report. And then the letter from the U.S. Department of Education in Exhibit A and the 16 required components were shared with this group, members of the 255 committee on January 11th. And they were highlighted again at the January 25th meeting. In terms of the detailed timeline for implementation, following the January 25th meeting, at the request of the advisory committee chair, the department staff developed a timeline that reflected the work of LD 135, 255, and 386 resolves and intersected with the work of the PCG report of 2020 to reflect the interconnected and interrelated work. The timelines for all three LDs were shared with the advisory committees on February 14th and 15th, and the department staff also began internal discussions with school finance staff on how to consider possible funding formula for former CDS program. Those discussions are ongoing. Then the advisory committee members recognized the complexity of the timeline for all three and the interrelationships between the three. Some superintendents shared ideas for implementation of work in the next year as part of an exploration of SAU oversight, which should be encouraged. A readiness toolkit is being developed by us currently, and that is going to be used to look at specific capacity related issues. The estimated full transition of 3 to 5 year olds to the SAUs is the 2025-26 school year, and transition of the state intermediate education unit for Part C only. They would happen at the same time. As we mentioned in an earlier presentation, we can't adjust CDS until we can't change anything, and it all has to happen at the same time. So part of the work we did was to understand the state intermediate education agency, which is an established as a body, corporate and politic, and as a public instrumentality of the state for the purpose of identifying, evaluating, and providing early intervention services to eligible infants, toddlers with disabilities from birth to under age 3 and their families. The exercise by the SIEU of the powers conferred by this chapter is the performance of an essential public function by and on behalf of the state. The organizational structure, which was reviewed with this advisory committee, included a board of directors, governing board versus advisory board, time and attention, a variety of knowledge and skill sets, voting versus non-voting members, and we also considered examples of MEC DHH, GBSD, and Maine MSSM. So all of those were the discussion of the meeting that occurred at the end of January. We reviewed all the components of that. And the recommendation was is for an external board that is separate from the DOE, similar to the quasi-state agencies, MEC, DHH was the recommendation.
Erin, may I, there is a question in the chat. Can you clarify the acronym MSSM?
It's Maine Science.
School of Science and Mathematics.
Thank you. I didn't say it because I couldn't remember the science and mathematics. School of Science and Mathematics. In this work with the advisory committee, we also clarified the roles of the SIEU versus the department as a lead agency under Part C, because there was concern that there was not a separate governing entity. So the SIEU responsibilities would include the direct provision of Part C, including child find, child count, identification, evaluation, development of the IFSPs, provision of early intervention services, extended Part C option, and procedural safeguards. They would also do referrals outside of the Part C system. They would transition children in Part C to Part B, and they would do data collection, maintenance of educational records, and provide professional development. The DOE responsibilities would be system of personal development, public awareness program, funding mechanism and reimbursements, rulemaking, including definition of developmental delay, child find, identification, evaluation, provision of early intervention services, natural environments, personnel qualification, and procedural safeguards. Also, we would be the lead agency, ensuring compliance with Part C by monitoring and oversight of the SEIEU and submitting the annual application to OSEP, U.S. Department of Education, SSPAPR, which is state, Roberta, help me, annual performance report, the state systemic annual performance report, and would facilitate the interagency agreements and coordination of resources across agencies, and would also facilitate the state interagency coordinating council. So those are the separate roles that we discussed. We also in 255 discussed the extended Part C option. We did this on several different occasions and finally got to a poll at the end of our conversation around this. And as we recall, probably many of you recall, Part C, extended Part C option only apply to children who are served in Part C, who turn 3, transition, and are eligible for Part B. And it's about, in our last data check, that was about 40% of the children who are in Part C qualified for Part B, and that matches national averages. There are 3 different options here, and we know that this would be a delay of FAPE and that parents could adjust this at any time. We also looked at the 2 states currently offering this to age 4 and noticed that with these 2 states, there was about 15% of the children who are taking advantage of this. And when we provided this calculation to you on our call, we said that would mean about 87 children per year. So the advisory group met to consider whether to apply to OSEP to utilize the extended Part C option, and if applying for the extended Part C option, to consider the application duration of the extended option from 3 until the beginning of the school year following the child's 3rd, 4th, or 5th birthday. And then we did a straw poll, a Zoom poll, and then we had some emails that came in following the meeting for members who couldn't attend. Those were only available to members of the advisory group. Non-advisory group members were not involved in the straw poll, Zoom poll, or email poll. Maine DOE considered the advisory group's feedback and examined other states' current implementation of the extended Part C option and determined that we will submit an application. 100% of you thought that we should, and that we are going to utilize that for 3-year-olds up until the 3rd birthday. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol.
Thanks, Erin. Nancy?
Lots to get in there. I took as many notes as I could. I think from my point of view, I agree that we should submit a Part C option, no doubt about it. I think that we need to have more conversation around who controls the system of personnel development, and I disagree that we need to. I believe we need to allow the extended Part C option until the child turns 4. Thank you. Those are the places.
We'll invite other voices. What squares with your thinking? Where are you feeling especially in alignment? And what are your deltas or areas where clarification may help, or you have concerns? Any considerations that you would like to offer? Hi, Sarah.
Hello. I had a question for Nancy based on her comment. who else do you think are possible entities for the system of personnel development?
I think the board of the actual quasi-state agency. I think developing and being able to manage and control that service needs to be provided in this exact same way that the main science and math happens. As a quasi-state agency myself, the executive director and the board is the most knowledgeable about what their staff is going to need. I think that the department, similar to how they use it for OCFS or ODES, they suggest the types of training that needs to be considered and continued, but ultimately it is the agency that chooses to do it or not. Or for that matter, the department recommends certain trainings or offers certain trainings available, and SAUs choose to do it or not, but ultimately it's the local board, or I believe it should be, in this case, the board of the quasi-state agency.
We can't hear you, Sarah.
Sarah?
Sorry, can I add just one more piece? The system of personnel development required under Part C is more than training the internal people of the SIEU. There's a specific requirement that it include training referral sources such as pediatricians. Does that square with your idea, Nancy?
If they are in charge of child find, it sure does.
Okay.
Because
I
that
just
is
want to make sure.
if they're in charge of doing the service, then they should also be doing all of that other other things. If not, then the department is getting into a conflict situation, in my opinion.
Thank you. Other thoughts and comments, how this squares with your thinking? Hi, Carrie.
I just wanted some clarification to make sure I'm understanding correct. For the extended Part C option, the department will only apply if it's determined that it will be extended to 4 or beyond. If it's extended to 3, you're waiting on Biden's legislation to see if you have to apply to OSEP for that. Is that correct?
No, we would be applying for the Part C extended option to the age of 3 unless we're told that we don't need to because everyone is getting that. But we don't have that confirmation, so we're going to plan on applying for it.
Okay, and when's the deadline to apply?
May, I think.
So you're planning on applying for it, but if Biden's legislation goes through, you won't have to.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Sorry, Carrie,
Yeah,
I just
no, go.
wanted to clarify that it's the start of the school year after the 3rd birthday. So depending on where that birthday falls, that child, the family can choose to stay in Part C until the following school year starts. So in
if the
some
birthday
cases,
falls after September when the school year starts, which I'm just using September as the date, then the child gets that full year of schooling.
correct. So
If
in some cases, the child could almost be 4 by the
Okay.
time we would transition to Part B. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of like how the July 15th option works now for some kids who are get the chapter, what is it, 76 option?
Oh,
676.
676. Sorry, I left a 6 off. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that makes it, except it would be September as opposed to, or just the start of the school year, and it would be whatever school that child's currently attending or where that student resides. What determines the start of the school year for children in pre-K?
When the placement that they're in starts. So if
Okay.
they're in a private pre-K, when that starts, they typically align with schools in the area.
Yeah.
So it would be whenever where they're attending starts school.
And so the department has decided age 3 at this point in time.
Based on the feedback that we got. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because everyone wanted it. It was half and half, kind of 3, 4, 3 and 4, 3 or 4, but everyone, 100% of the people who commented said we would like it. somewhere on the fence. 3 or 4 would be good. No, I think one person wanted to 5.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I would chime in. It would be especially, I mean, do you have to apply every year for this?
Yeah.
Okay. I would highly, I mean, it would be my preference to age 4, especially while you're transitioning, for that extra year, for parents to be able to decide while school districts are, especially when we're going through this transition process. That would be my preference. And thank you for answering my clarifying questions.
Thanks, Carrie. Anyone else want in at this point? And just a quick reminder, Delta essentially means what would you like to see changed? What considerations do you think you'd like to offer? What clarifying questions do you have? Hi, Rita.
Hi. So, is it possible for us to get the slides that you've already gone through? Because I'm having trouble remembering now all the things we just went through, and without having them in advance, it's really hard to remember everything you just went over. So is it possible to have those emailed to us so we can be looking at them?
We
During
can
the
email them to
discussion?
you after the meeting, if that's okay. I don't have the capacity to email them to you while I'm presenting them.
So I just have to say that, like, if I can't be reading these things, I'm having trouble.
Is there one that
Coming to
particularly like
agreement.
you'd like me to go back to?
I mean, I'd like.
Let me just, Rita, let me just go through what we've discussed, and then you can let me know if there's anything. So we started with the four items that the bill was going through, okay? And then we talked about establishing the advisory committee and the components of the plan that we had to develop. I know this is fast, but I'm just trying to give you a little memory aid. We established, we talked on the 25th around and had the presentation on the SIEU. Sarah discussed that. We also shared the MOU with DHHS so that you could preview that. We talked about the 16 requirements. We gave that to you in a document. And our letter from US Department of Education saying that we met all the requirements. And then we gave you a pretty detailed timeline of how all of the LDs intersect. This is pertaining to the SIEU, what we discussed in our advisory committee, the recommendations, and then the role of the SIEU versus the department. And then we just did the extended Part C option and what our recommendation was for that. So does that help at all?
Yes, that did
Okay.
help.
Do you have any feedback or deltas or check squares? Sorry, I'm using the wrong language.
Yeah, so I'm still having some concerns about how the quasi-governmental agency is going to work, what that's going to look like. In terms of, you mentioned about that there was a letter from, was it OSAP, right? And that you were meeting all the requirements. Can we receive information about previously when you were not meeting the requirements and what it was that CDS wasn't meeting and what those issues were? Can we?
We can look into that.
Have you
for
ever
you.
shared that with us?
No, we just shared the current one, how we're doing currently.
Yeah.
We didn't go back to what used to happen.
Yeah.
But this is us meeting them currently.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I have some issues around the quasi-governmental and what that's going to look like. I forget exactly what I voted for, but I'm probably leaning more towards, age 4, where Nancy is around, the part, the option and yeah, and I just again have to say that I'm really struggling not having these in front of me to read. So it's just hard
Can I
to
chime
not
in?
have them in
I'm
advance.
I'm sorry to step on you there, Rita. I'm trying to download really fast and find an email that we've used before so I can send these out to you. So I'm hoping to get that to you in the next minute or two.
Thank you. That's great.
Andrea? Hi.
Hi. I feel like this is a really good summary of the meetings that we've had so far. I was also team 4-year-olds, but if that was outvoted, I get it. The only question I had was, we had a slide where we were talking about kind of the makeup of this group and who we'd want to see included. And I would love it if we could see that in the presentation too. I don't know if that's possible, but that's a thought.
I think we can provide, I think that we can provide you with the slides that we did in the presentation after this.
They're actually on the webpage. Erin.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, and I see, Jamie, did you just drop a link in previous determination letters from OSEP? So I'm also noting that a link is in the chat.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. I meant for the committee to be able to see the suggestions, not for us to be able to see them.
The suggestions on the quasi-state agency.
Right. Yes, the membership of that group.
That's interesting point, Andrea. And I'm going to have one of my teammates, maybe Megan.
Nancy?
Perhaps that just knowing that I think it's really critical to look at this. We're going to and I think that the makeup of the committee might be a thing that further conversation or discussion needs to be need to be had for from our point of view. There might be concerns not having seen it. Is what I'm hearing. And I'm also hearing that there might be concerns about some of the details of the quasi-state agency because we need more information. But I don't want us to get stuck. I want to make those things clear and say those might be stopgaps. Thank you.
Roberta?
I just want to clarify that I believe that when Sarah presented, we took down all of the suggestions and they're on that recording of all the suggested committee members for the quasi-state board. That's what we're talking about. And so that would be already on a slide that's in the recording that we did when Sarah was presenting the quasi-state agency.
Andrea?
Yeah, I was just wondering about those suggestions going to the education committee. That's all I was asking about.
Thank you. Got it.
All right, moving on. One of the things we talked about in both is 386 and 255 is the recommendation for 3-year-olds. I just want to say that in our earlier meetings, we had our first 2 meetings in both groups were really around supporting and reinforcing understanding concepts and process and procedure and law. And so during those meetings, we had feedback. We had lots of people offering suggestions or taking temperature gauges or what are your ideas? Those were more brainstorming sessions. And after that, we relegated the vote to the advisory members. So then the participants who were there for expert opinion were not actual voting members of these decisions. So So based on your feedback and discussions, research from other states, we would be supporting transitioning 3-year-old special education services to SAUs with a strategic plan to support this transition that would occur over a several-year period. By taking ownership of children in Part B earlier, SAUs can ensure that children have the critical services they need prior to entering school. And the transition would create consistency of the delivery of services and help schools navigate community needs in order to prioritize educational planning. I'm not going to go through this group feedback, but it was this feedback that led to that decision when we considered a quasi-state agency providing for 3-year-olds, a hybrid model, or when the SAU is responsible. And most people, again, only members of the advisory group were, invited to provide feedback in terms of what they wanted to do. And during our informal gauges, seemed that parents and educators and other members of the committee were in support with the right transitions, that this would be a good idea.
Okay. So what are you feeling especially aligned with? What would be helpful to clarify? Where are you envisioning change would be helpful? Thoughts? Okay. Seeing none, Erin, you want to keep moving?
No, can you put it back so I can read it? I didn't get to read it all. I'm a slower processor. So
You wanted to read the reasons?
I just want to see the slide before, please. Oh, okay. Right. And you just stated that this is the feedback. You did not state what you guys chose, correct?
We chose that 3-year-olds would be going to SAUs.
All right. I think that from the council's point of view, we need a lot more specifics before we're able to agree with that. Thank you.
Other thoughts and comments at this time?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I would like to clarify what
Carrie?
you mean by the council, Nancy. Was that what council?
I represent the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's who you're speaking for, has the concern.
At this moment, yes. If a lot of people say that they also have concerns, then it might turn into to this group. But at this moment, that I was speaking as from that, yes.
Yeah, I didn't know what you were speaking
Right.
about, so I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, Carrie?
Unmute would be helpful. At the beginning of this process, I think when we did do our straw poll, I did voice that I would like to see 3 and 4-year-olds both moved. As the process evolved, I'm much more hesitant with 3-year-olds at this point in time, because I'm not sure if SAUs are going to be prepared, and I'm really concerned for our 3-year-olds. There's a big difference between a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, in my opinion. And I have some concerns about 3-year-olds. I know they're going to be shifted after 4-year-olds, and the intention is for 4-year-olds to go first, but I am not as on board with 3-year-olds going to SOUs right now, after partaking in this process. So I know at the beginning, when we did do the straw poll, I was more in favor of that, and that has changed since going through this process. So I know we're using that straw poll to measure, but I wanted to just be clear that my view has shifted a bit since then. So thank you.
Andrea, you had your hand up and put it down, and you were next in the order. So I just want to make sure you meant to put it down. That's all.
Thank you. I just want to note that I think there's continued need for discussions with this group around what the transition process would look like for 3-year-olds. And so that's not to say well, I just think we're not done with the transition plan, right? So we have an outline of some basic ideas and things, but I think that we need community players and families to be involved in the process of what that looks like. We're all part of working with CDS right now in the process. And so I just think that going forward with the transition, I just want to make sure that the parent and community voices are part of all of those discussions going forward too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Rita?
Yeah, I definitely have concerns about moving the 3-year-olds anytime soon. So yeah, I would definitely have some pause to think about putting a hold on that until we really see how the 4-year-old transition goes.
Thank you. Tiffany, hi.
Hello. I realize this is the first mention of 386, and so maybe you're going to go through the points of the resolve like you did for 255, which I appreciate. But with that said, you know, what you presented on the previous slide was an idea and a concept, and I just go back to a request for the level of detail that was asked for in the resolve.
Thanks, Tiffany. Sarah?
I have one question and one comment. The comment is that I understood the plan that both the 3s and the 4s are moving together for the 2025-2026 school year at the end. Am I right, Erin, or am I wrong?
We are planning to make it complete by July 2026, given readiness. So
Right. But that's both the 3s and the 4s, right?
3s and the 4s, yeah.
Okay. And then my question for the folks who are unhappy or aren't persuaded about moving the 3s. So are you thinking they should stay in CDS as it's currently constituted? And where does that leave the fact that it's woefully out of compliance?
Thanks, Sarah. Is anyone wanting to respond to that in terms of those who have commented? Rita, and then Nancy, and then I will get to you, Sandy. Thank you. And Roberta.
Can I respond, or do you want to wait? I can respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Roberta. If you're on point, if you're on
Yeah,
topic.
I am. What I guess what I want to clarify is that it's the provision of faith. It's the taking over of faith. That doesn't mean that the 3-year-olds, we're going to have to continue our community partners. We're still going to have children in private preschools and in private daycares and providing services to these children. SAUs will take on the FAPE responsibility and the IEP compliance responsibility, but they may not bring children necessarily into the SAU to provide services. We will have to have our private preschools. We will have to have our private special purpose private preschools to continue to provide the services that these children need. But we need the partnerships with our SAUs to continue to build capacity in providing for the needs that these children have 3 to 5. That's all.
Thanks, Roberta. Let's see, Rita, Nancy, and then Sandy.
You know, I just would say that one of the things that I have sort of changed my thinking about over time and going through this process is really feeling like we need to fix CDS now, not just take pieces of it and move it over and hope it all works out for the best. I'm just feeling more and more like, we need to fix child find. We need to fix eligibility. And if we don't go at all of these things and fix them, just taking a piece of CDS and moving it, I'm worried that it's really not going to change. And so I really think we need to have a more comprehensive and holistic thinking about fixing the current system before we move it out anywhere else.
Thanks, Nancy.
Hi, thank you. And I want to reply to Sarah. The issue is I agree. I'll say and I have a feeling after listening to other comments, I could say safely, we agree that there's a lot of problems with Part B. You just said it too. There's a nightmare problems in that. The issue is I am at a place of feeling a lot of concern that I don't understand enough of the details to know that 3-year-olds are going to be protected and safe through the process. If I had my dream and druthers, we would get rid of the rectangle in which the department is on one side of the table and we're on the other, and I'd go all Camelot on us and King Arthur and round table, have a lot of good conversations, which is what I think really needs to happen to get through some of these really deep concerns. What I'm seeing right now says, trust us. Everything's going to be fine. The special education providers are going to be there. This is going to be there, and that place isn't there. We need to talk, and we feel like I think parents and providers have things that and early childhood providers have things that they could contribute to this.
Thank you, Sandy.
Well, I believe today I'm the lone SAU representative on this meeting. And I'm also representing MadSec. I'm a special services director. And I think most people know where I stand on this. And I'm just going to echo what Roberta was saying. It's really about extending what we already do in public school to 3- and 4-year-olds. And really, we're not going to move all of the 3-year-olds into public school. We're going to embrace the current pieces that are available and utilize them, and hopefully build new and better partnerships and use some of the resources that we have in our schools to support those students, so that we're not two separate agencies operating two separate things. We as public schools need to acknowledge that we are receiving students who are not receiving early intervention, and we need to help support that. I'm already doing that in my district. If CDS comes to me and says, I need a speech therapist for this student, I am working with my team to make this happen, because we want kids to get services. And so this perception that we're just going to take over pieces or fix pieces, I don't understand that, because we do the whole piece here of faith in public school. Am I going to say it's going to be easy for every district to do this? No, but that's why we have hopefully a timeline and a transition plan and support for districts that need it, and those that are already doing it, helping them get better. I just don't know what else we can do to reassure you that we're on the same page as you. We want what's best for kids, and we have some ability to help support that.
Thanks, Sandy. Carrie?
So maybe it was just me and what I was hearing, but I was under the impression that 4-year-olds were going to be transitioning first and then 3-year-olds would follow. And so now that I'm hearing that 3- and 4-year-olds are going at the same time, another concern that is being raised in my brain is what's going to stop SAUs from creating regionalized pre-K programs, which could be a very big issue with least restrictive environments. and access to typically developing kids. This was when we started this process years ago, and I participated in the very first stakeholder group under Roy Fowler. That was my number one concern. And I feel like I'm right back at that starting point with this information. I don't have a problem, and I think I said this at one of the stakeholder groups, with SAUs regionalizing services. That doesn't mean that we're regionalizing students in the same building, which may not be in their community and may not be with typically developing students. I don't think that's the best fit for 3 and 4-year-olds. And that would be a concern of mine if we're just handing 3 and 4-year-olds over to SAUs.
Thanks, Carrie. Sarah and then Tiffany.
Maybe Roberta or Aaron is better to speak to this, Carrie, but my understanding, or one of the numerous issues with compliance with Part B at the moment, is that students now, 3 and 4-year-olds, are being served in overly restrictive environments. See, I can speak when I work on this hard. And my thought would be that that's one of the benefits to moving to the SAUs, access to typical peers, because I think, and again, Roberta or Aaron, please help me with this, or maybe Sandy knows, the statistics are all wrong about the number of 3 and 4-year-olds that are being served in quote unquote special purpose preschools that in kindergarten go into a regular education setting with supports.
Yeah,
anyway,
I agree. I agree with you, Sarah. You're right. It is happening now. My concern would be what would happen would be, and I live in an area where I see it happening, but an SAU would attempt to take 3 or 4 towns, because the numbers aren't, enormously high, especially when you get into other regions, and put those kids in a regionalized preschool program under all 3 or 4 SAUs. So it would be the same issue, Sarah. It would just be happening under the SAUs. I agree with you. It's happening now. You're right. If every SAU is serving the kids individually and creating an IEP and placing those students in individualized programs based on the need, which is what's supposed to happen, not on a preschool program that they've created within the SAU to address the need, then it works, which I think is what's supposed to happen. I just have concerns that it's easy for SAUs to say, okay, I'm just going to use my towns for an example. Saco, Biddeford, Dayton, and Old Orchard, we're going to create a preschool program. And that's not necessarily least restrictive environment for those kids, because we're getting all 3 to 4-year-olds. So let's bring them in and create a preschool program and meet their need. So it's a balancing act between unmet need with services and least restrictive environment. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. And you're right, it is happening now. And if it's done in the way that I would hope it would be done, it wouldn't happen. But there could be a tendency to create programs like this, especially when we get up into areas where services are a little bit more harder to obtain, like Northern and Western Maine. So it's just a concern I can see possibly happening.
Yeah, thanks. Sarah, were you going to jump in, or I was going to call on you, Roberta, if you're responding to this thread, because I want to,
Yeah, I just want to back up what Sarah said, that we do have evidence that when children do enter kindergarten from a more restrictive setting than what would be in a kindergarten setting, they often do not require the same level of service that they come from in a more restrictive setting. I would want to ensure that children get the least restrictive setting possible within any SAU or any regionalization program. That's why we do need our community partners. That's why we do need our already established preschools, because we want to be able to extend, the opportunity for children to receive services. And right now we're requiring, people to, consider us because we're unable to meet all the needs of children. And so if we continue to partner with SAUs, we can get some of those services in place, and not in a restrictive setting, but in a setting where they already exist. And so that they can have a SLP come in and provide services, or they can have an itinerant teacher come in and provide those services. It's capacity on all levels. The SAUs and us are, struggling with capacity, but if we join forces, we would be able to better meet the needs of all children. Because remember, we are here for children and families first. That's what this is about, is servicing our children and making sure that they get the services that they need in the least restrictive environment.
Thanks. Tiffany, then Nancy, and then Andrea.
Sure. At the risk of repeating myself, I did just want to reply to Sandy and support the idea that there's an excellent opportunity with SAUs providing FAPE to kids. And as a representative of Maxby community service providers, we are in support of that concept. So the repetitious part is just to say that, it worries me that when I hear lots of words about hoping in this process, because I think we have an opportunity to vet details, and I think the kids and families deserve a level of detail that we haven't yet seen in an implementation plan itself.
Thanks, Tiffany. Nancy?
I'm taking lots of notes. I agree with what Tiffany is saying. The issue, and back to what Roberta, I understand and agree with the reason why we are discussing this and why we're discussing 3 and 4-year-olds. The issue is not having enough information about the how, what, and when. So there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of concepts, but it's too important to back this without understanding the details that really are what is required. And I would hope that even the education committee wouldn't move forward just blank without having enough details to know that what is moving forward is exactly what the hope is. I'm also very worried about, one of the things we learned in this process is I think it's either 26 or 36 pre-Ks that have universal 4-year-old programs. And universal meant something different. Universal didn't mean kids with disabilities and not kids with disabilities in the program itself. It meant that they could be there 5 days a week. With the lack of, I'm worried about the lack of capacity to serve all 4-year-olds across the state. Without that, it's going to be really hard to have a least restrictive environment. And I'd like to know how we're going to really build up and ensure that every county knows how to do this and is able to do this. It strikes me that from what I've heard, Washington County doesn't actually have a 4-year-old program. So looking at 4-year-olds is I think far more important. I agree with the why. It's the details that I need. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I know in these processes, I'm always listening and thinking, what is reasonable to expect at this point in terms of details, and why or why not would one invest the time at this point until there's some degree of approval? It's a really important question. Andrea?
Echo what Tiffany said as far as Maxby supporting the idea of working with the SAUs. A lot of the agencies and programs have special purpose programming for not only preschoolers, but K-12 kids as well, and work with the SAUs well on a regular basis now as it is. I also think that it would be really worth having a more in-depth conversation about why CDS referrals look the way that they do and how kids are served and chosen to be placed in the environments that they're in. As somebody that's been in service provision of Part B for over 10 years with some changes that have happened. I think it would be really interesting to have those conversations as far as what does it actually look like for a parent and service provider? What are the options? What's actually available when we're talking about LRE? Because I think a lot of the time, what we imagine could play out is not something where we have an actual place to put a child. So I think the idea that there are many levels of LREs is a great idea, and I think it's something we're striving for, but I think a lot of times it comes down to a couple of choices. And so I think that the actuality of placing a child in an LRE is trickier, and maybe that's something that we could problem solve together.
Thanks very much, Andrea. Other comments for now? It's been a rich discussion. Thank you. Well, then let's move along, Erin, shall we?
Okay, I just want to say that Megan Welter is taking notes, and we are going to take some of the questions that we haven't been able to answer, and we'll get those to you after the meeting. So Megan, am I right about that? I think I'm right about that.
Yes, you're right about that.
Excellent. Okay. All right, so moving on. Oh, Sarah. Oh, you're on mute.
I went to the link that Jamie gave, and I don't see anything other than the 2020 OSEP letter for Part C.
Let me do some digging, Sarah.
Oh, you are there, Jamie. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could find 2020, but I couldn't find the back years. So I'm sure it's probably that I don't know how to search it correctly, but just if other people look, I don't want them to run into the same thing.
It's really difficult to navigate the CDS website. That's where they should be posted. I do know some of the links became broken when there was some switch over in technology land that clearly is not my expertise to explain. But let me take a look and see if I can give a more specific link.
Okay. Sarah, I hope you're complete. Your hand is still up, but I'm just going to assume you haven't raised it. You forgot to unraise it. We're moving on. Okay. The rest of 386. So this is resolved directing us, the Department of Education, to establish the process for transitioning the provision of early childhood special education services for children with disabilities from 4 years of age and under to 6 years of age from the Regional Child Development Services system to school administrative units. The implementation timeline incorporating the PCG independent review and advice from the advisory committee and department staff. We have to maintain the state intermediate education unit statutory provision while simultaneously increasing the capacity of SAUs to take on oversight of the provision of FAPE for 3 to 5 year olds. Many 4-year-olds right now are receiving their services through SAUs and in partnership with SAUs. So there is a bit of a staggering between 4 and 3-year-olds, but we have to maintain this mechanism for provision of service while we're transitioning and until every SAU meets the readiness level that we need them to provide FAPE. States may only use the federal IEU structure if it was in place prior to 1997. So we know that in revising this, we have to maintain it because it's grandfathered. If something happened to it and it weren't maintained, we couldn't reinitiate it. And we did provide you with a detailed timeline which really outlines some of the specifics that people were asking for around fiscal planning and staff planning and capacity and transportation, and all those different components are embedded in the timeline. So in our timeline, we incorporated really a lot of the recommendations from the PCG report. So on the left column is the PCG implementation components. And then on the DOE timeline, which is inclusive of these components, we have you know, in the first table column there, we have designate the state agency, administrative office, 619 state staff, revised state regulations. And then in the timeline, this is considered in the consideration of Department of Education and Office of Special Services. So we have broken apart and identified, and again, you guys will receive a copy of this, where the PCG components end up in our detailed timeline. So Carol.
I was just checking the chat. Megan Barnes sends her regrets. She had to go. Nancy.
One thing that is in the PCG, but I haven't heard anything about, there's a number of issues that haven't been kind of addressed, is what thoughts about eligibility. That is one piece that we haven't really talked about. I think this is a real opportunity and critical time to discuss and look at eligibility, especially around specifically Part C. And I'm concerned that's an area that needs to be talked about. So there are areas in PCG that we haven't got to talk about at all.
I just will respond to that by saying that discussion is in LD 135. So it is addressed in a different LD. It just wasn't in the directives of these LDs.
I disagree, but thank you.
Carrie?
Erin, you had mentioned, I think you used the word readiness in regards to SAUs meeting a readiness to take on 3 and 4 year olds. And I'm just wondering, what are we using to determine if an SAU is ready? Who is making that determination? And what happens if an SAU is not ready? And then just to complete, I'll let you respond. I just didn't want to raise my hand again. On the previous slide, in which you align the PCG report with how the DOE is responding, I think for me, there's a lot of minutia in what the PCG report's requiring, and there's not that minutia with how the DOE is responding. And that's, I think, what has been missing for me during this process, is that minutia to feel comfortable. And then I'll let you respond. Sorry, Erin.
Sorry. Carrie, I have the last thing, but not the first thing. The last thing is the PCG components that we mainly didn't include in our report were ones that were already complete. Those are the ones like the ICC, you know, that was like one of their recommendations. So I want to, you know, and also they were just recommendations based on a snapshot of time of CDS in that moment. And there have been a lot of changes to the to CDS in terms of the amount of programming we're developing. And so I just think that you should keep that in mind. And please remind me of the subject of the first part of your question, because I couldn't.
Yeah, and just to, I understand what you're saying here. What I'm talking about is the recommendations that you say you are addressing. I'm missing the detail for how MDOE is addressing it, I guess is what I was saying. Not the recommendations that were in the recommendations that you say you are addressing. Like can you go back a slide? Sorry.
Yeah, hang on.
So where we're just saying like staffing considerations, like what are those considerations? Those are the details that I'm missing, is the how and the why.
So
okay.
I totally understand. Those staffing considerations are broken out in our timeline. There's many components under that, which lead back to, and there's also elements that you'll see in the report after it's made public that kind of explain some of that. And I think again,
that's just, yeah, what we've been saying, sorry, the bird's being obnoxious. What we've been saying, or what I've been saying is, yeah, some of it was explained in the timeline, but there wasn't enough. I would have liked to see more detail. That said, I was asking about the readiness about SAUs.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the only word I need. And now I'm back with you. Yeah, we are developing a readiness assessment checklist. We're doing it with National Technical Assistance Centers, our early learning team. And based on the incorporating a lot of the components of the report and the fiscal needs and the requirement that we kind of look to develop a new fiscal funding formula, which is going to take a lot of support around, and MEPRI is involved in that, and school facilities is involved in that. So there's all these different components that have to be, but the readiness assessment checklist that's being created will be developed pretty soon, like within the next month or so, as we're initially looking at doing some more in-depth surveying by MEPRI around looking and seeing and identifying where districts or SAUs are at. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Priscilla and then Nancy. You are muted, Priscilla.
There I go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I just have a clarification question about the timeline. Several meetings back, was it talked about that the timeline was really flexible, that the 24, 25, that it depended on the readiness levels of the different SAUs? And I think was that not talked about?
Erin, do you want to unmute? And
sorry, it was discussed, Priscilla. I think that what has been created, though, is the understanding that we can't transition to the SIEU until the CDS question is answered. So we wanted to put a little bit more definitive timeline. I'm not going to suggest that that's by law everyone is going to be, but hopefully with the activities that we're doing around understanding readiness and surveying and providing people with support. We know we have 15 more pre-Ks under development. We know that we're expanding classrooms that SAUs are going to be able to partner with us to create and to take over. So all of those things are happening. We're hopeful that we can get it done by summer of July 2026. So legally, that would be the we have to have like an end date in order to be able to understand how that transition of all the different pieces would work. Understanding that something could happen that may extend that timeline.
And also the readiness levels of the SAUs. Did I understand before too that some parts, if they weren't completely ready to take over everything, that a hybrid model could be used and to support them for whatever pieces that they could take on until they were able to completely take it on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. That's it. Yeah.
all right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Nancy?
Yeah, I really wanted to say thank you. I need I also am very interested in the readiness assessments and how we're going to be able to basically it's all the avenues of that detailed plan. I'm feeling like I might be saying being the broken record that Tiffany was saying that needs to happen. I also need a clearer understanding of the hybrid model, and I'm aware that we only have 18 minutes, so I'm just going to have you guys continue, and I'll just keep making notes about what needs more stuff.
If you think about something after this meeting, go ahead and email us, because we will be putting together some of the things we only have 18 minutes left. So
we should know the way for the advisory committee. Please include me as well, because I've been asked to present to the education committee after the department finishes their reports to be able to respond to it. So please, if you include something to the department, please include me so that I can appropriately represent.
In the interest of time, I'll draw attention to the chat and a comment that you made, Jamie. And so I'll invite people to read that. And then, Erin, I'm doing a time check. We have about 15, 17 minutes left, and I know you were just glancing at the slides, so.
Well, actually, that was an accident, but it did give me
Oh.
the opportunity to look at them.
Okay.
Yes, we are almost complete here. So really a recommendation that you haven't heard until today, this is new information, is that in our recommendation that we are going to transition the FAPE responsibility for Section 619 services for children starting July 1st, 2023. And many people who I've told that to, think that that means that we're going to suddenly all the SAUs are going to be responsible for all these children, but that's not quite what that means. So we are going to maintain fiscal responsibility for the full cost of the provision of preschool services, including transportation and due process for 2 years until that 2026. So it would be as if CDS is now the contracted provider to support the continued development, but that the FAPE obligation would be transitioned in 2023. And then we are also revising that we're doing the revision of main statutes for the provision of Part B, Section 619 services. So that's something that will be going in front of the committee on Wednesday. So the transition of Part B services for children in Section 619 to SAUs over a period of time, depending on the SAU readiness by July 2026. During that period of transition of Part B services, a hybrid model will be in place. In the hybrid model, CDS shares the provision of services with SAUs. They collaborate to deliver services based on a menu of a la carte services, including but not limited to special education services, related services, transportation, and administrative tasks. The hybrid model will be in place till July 1, 2026. Again, we wanted an end date for this. That was a really strong point made by the PCG report, is that we extend this out for 4 to 7 years, that people would be challenged to maintain employment. We already are having difficulty given the light and attention on CDS. It's already very challenging to recruit staff. So we are going to formalize the transition process and transition resources for SAUs, including resource mapping, readiness assessments, and for SAUs to access to prepare for the transition. And we're going to implement a staffing support and transition process for CDS staff. That's going on currently. I think I've mentioned we have a grant for $1.5 million to support the CDS staff in increasing their certification and supporting their transition goals. And then fiscal considerations, fiscal formula developed independent of EPS. And that, again, there's a lot of moving parts to that because our current EPS model is under some review right now. But it would be a different fiscal model to support the provision of preschool services. We're also recommending a central billing system for Medicaid and administrative support for that billing system as well, and a state funding process for Part B high-cost students that are in the Section 619 area. And that is, I'm going to stop the share. Those are our slides and those are our recommendations, which will be, and Megan, maybe you can speak to the report writing issue and why it's, what the protocol is for sharing a report like this with members of a stakeholder group.
All right, I think I'm unmuted now. Much of what you are seeing are pieces that we've been drawing from our reports. For the sake of full disclosure, we are still crafting, drafting, revising, and fixing our reports. They are long, complex, and it's been an enjoyable around-the-clock co-writing process. But I will say that the purpose of those reports is to respond to the resolves, and we are to share those reports with the committee, the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. And so it would be inappropriate for us to provide them more broadly, especially in a public meeting like this one, prior to sharing them with members of the committee. So we are certainly sharing a lot of details. There are pieces that are literally cut and paste and included in here, but the reports need to go to the committees first.
Thanks, Megan. Anything else before I open the floor, Aaron or Megan? Okay, I think Tiffany, you had your hand up first, but I'm not 100% sure. So it's the honor system, Nancy and Tiffany. Yeah, okay, Nancy ceding the floor. Tiffany.
Sure. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to go back to the slide that seemingly has some 2023 bombshell on it.
Is this the one? Yes, Tiffany. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so can you talk about how that changed and where that came from and the significance of it?
I can say that these plans are not done in isolation without other members and teams of the department, and that with discussions from various members of the Department of Education, including the Commissioner of Education and the Assistant Attorney General, Sarah Forrester, on this call, and other members of the Special Services team, that again, this is a dynamic process, and it's still based on your feedback. We have, kind of been constantly revising this document. So this is ultimately not my decision or Megan's decision. It's our commissioner and the commissioner's office and the AAG, who are, this is their plan. And so they, things are evolving as we work and plan this.
Thank you.
May I just really quickly just expand upon that briefly? I think one of the concerns that we have is if we prolong the transition to FAPE, that, we continue to live in this time where we are having these two systems where it is very difficult to meet all the needs for 619. And so there really was a sense of we believe this is the right path to providing the best services for our youngest children, our youngest learners in the state. And so we're eager to try to get that up and rolling as soon as possible. So.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yes, thank you. All right, a couple things. I completely agree with the centralized billing system, although discussing where that seats and how that goes would be important. I think that DHHS perhaps should be the one who manages that. I am concerned about how we'll keep staff during this period, and haven't talked about this. I definitely need more information about the fiscal formula and how that's going to go given what's going on. I completely agree with having a high cost area effort to be able to do that. I do want to make a comment about the stance about how we're working with this resolve or these resolves. The resolve was made where that the input was with an advisory committee in all aspects of the plan. That's what it was. There's a challenge I have with only having internal based decision making because it's not democratic. And I understand that you say that the report is the commissioner's office, but what happens is not the commissioner. What happens is the legislature. And what they have asked is this to be a people or a broader opportunity. And it's I guess one reason why when I came into this, I was very interested in moving 3- and 4-year-olds, but because of the way this process has moved, I cannot support 3-year-olds at all. And 4-year-olds scare me because of the lack of information and lack of transparency and continual conversation about that this is the way it's going to go and this is how it is and that kind of language. It's very concerning, and it's not in compliance with the resolve. So I really want to say again that as we move forward, there's nothing more than I want other than to find places we can move forward but it's very, very important to me that we really try to figure out how do we shift this dynamic from this rectangle in which there's an internal and external haves and have-nots, when we're all really in the same system, in making really good decision making. And I don't want to delay things, but this is very uncomfortable. So I really want to go again. We need Camelot. We need a round table where full decisions and discussions can be had without veils and hopes and promises, but real discussions, and then going back and having you guys having discussions, not internal and then coming to us and not having the opportunity. So I think that's the concern that I'm hearing and have heard, I have to say, for about a decade. So this is the trend. We go to the education committee, the department says their plan, then there's people who go and say, but we're worried about this, and everything slows down. Until we talk as a whole group, I'm concerned. And these are children's and lives that we're losing.
Well, no one is not going to provide services for 3 and 4-year-olds, because it is, you know, I want to be reassured that our main goal is to make sure that these provision of services would be happening through a transition. We already know that we don't have the infrastructure to support what we have, which is why we really feel confident that even in building preschool classrooms, we still need more. I think people have heard me say that probably ad infinitum at this point. I don't know, Megan, if there's other comments. I mean, we do have other stakeholder groups that we work with outside of this committee. And I certainly involve the State Advisory Panel, which is a group that supports the person in my position, this position, and other entities, groups, parents. So this is, you know, we definitely take your feedback it's highly important to us. I think we've really listened and tried to listen for comprehension and understand, and have provided clarification and documentation as much as we can. So I feel really that I have a very good understanding of, you know, some of the suggestions and supports, and we certainly, that certainly has influenced our work.
Okay, I'll just quickly draw attention to the chat for those of you who may be following the discussion that's happening there regarding the determination letters and OSEP. There's a 3-part discussion there that I won't go into, but it's sort of highlighting where to find things and why certain things are in certain places, I think. So just flagging that for anyone for whom that is of interest. JC?
I just wanted to add that certainly one of the moving parts and part of the discussion within the department, we had a fiscal discussion this morning. It's our 3rd or 4th with the school finance team, and trying to look at, and also with members of the early childhood team. There's over 200 public 4-year-old classrooms. We're trying to look at the implications of that and those classrooms that get subsidy through EPS as part of the preschool. There is $10 million of ARP money that is going to start further partnership classrooms that can serve CDS and other children. So there are lots of moving parts that we're trying to look at how they fit together. And it's the kind of situation where I feel like we, at each of those finance meetings, we peel the onion back just a little bit more and begin to look at what are the data elements, such as we have 36 contracts or MOUs with school districts that are serving CDS kids. We need to look at what are the costs within those and what are those implications. So it is very much a work in progress, looking at each of those buckets. I mean, Roberta's done a survey of her CDS staff to look at who has what academic backgrounds, who may be in need of what kinds of coursework in order to move forward to be credentialed on what level. That's where Erin's going to use that $1.5 or $1.6 million to pay for the coursework. So there are pieces that we are almost every hour of every day figuring what are those other moving parts, and they get added to that timeline almost every day. I was in a meeting this morning and Megan was emailing back or texting back and forth to me. I think we need to put, 3 other things in that timeline because there is a lot of activity going on between Erin and the early childhood team developing that readiness document. So it is a complicated work in progress that has many pieces that are fitting together like the gears in a clock.
Thanks, JC.
Can I just add a piece?
oh.
I'm sorry, Carol.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
And one of the things that I've heard loud and clear is that, members of this advisory committee want to make sure that this is not adversarial, that it is not I think what Nancy has described as a rectangular table. And, you can get me going on Camelot because I like show tunes, but I do think that, it is important for us to continue to solicit information from the field, from you. We, as Roberta said, as Erin has said, we are going to be heavily dependent on our partners in the field to be able to do this together. We are not saying that we're taking this and we're assuming and going to do it all and do it in a top-down way. And that's kind of how I perceive it is coming across. And that's certainly not the intention. And at the same time, we have 3 pretty elaborate resolves that we need to address and report back to on the committee. And there are going to be pieces that, as JC said, will continue to sort of reveal themselves to us, where we're going to say, oh, that's another element that we've got to figure out and nest in here. And that's not a lack of planning. It is just understanding sort of like the complexity of this work. And we're in a historic moment. We're in a historic moment where there's will, I think, an acknowledgement of we can do better. And there's a will, and then we happen to also be in a time when we have some of the financial resources. So that's part of what we're also trying to seize upon. So, that's why I think you're hearing some measure of urgency as well. But we want to do it right. And that's the priority.
Thanks, Megan. I want to thank everyone. We are at time. It is 5 o'clock on the dot, according to my computer clock and my phone clock. So unless there is anything else, I'll thank you for your time and attention, and I will close the session. Thank you, everyone.